My name is Hope Montgomery, and I am 32 years old. I work as a marketing executive in Chicago, having climbed my way up from nothing. I have always been close to my parents, though our relationship has had its struggles. Recently, I spent months planning a surprise luxury trip to Spain for their 35th wedding anniversary. I was so excited to give them this gift, something they could never afford themselves. But when I revealed the surprise, they told me they wanted my unemployed sister Amber to go instead. Let me know where you are watching from, and subscribe to hear how I handled this family betrayal that broke my heart. I grew up in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Minnesota. Our house was small but comfortable, with blue shutters my father James painted every few years, and a garden my mother Diana tended religiously each spring. We were never wealthy, but my parents worked hard to provide for us. Dad taught history at the local high school, spending evenings grading papers at our kitchen table. Mom worked long shifts as a nurse at the community hospital, often coming home with tired eyes, but still making time to ask about our day. From an early age, the differences between my sister Amber and me were apparent. I was the planner, the achiever, the one with color-coded notebooks and homework finished days before it was due. I joined every club, volunteered on weekends, and babysit to earn extra money that I diligently saved. Amber was 3 years younger and approached life with a carefree attitude that often bordered on irresponsibility. She preferred socializing to studying, spending money to saving it, and living in the moment rather than planning for the future. Despite our differences, I loved my sister. We shared a bedroom until I left for college, whispering secrets across the darkness and making each other laugh with inside jokes. But even then, I noticed how my parents treated us differently. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected. When Amber managed to pull a B-, my parents celebrated with ice cream. I understood they were trying to encourage her, but sometimes it stung. Getting into Northwestern University was my proudest achievement. I still remember jumping up and down in our living room, clutching the acceptance letter, while my parents beamed with pride. But the partial scholarship I received still left a significant gap. My parents sat me down and explained that while they were incredibly proud, they simply couldn't afford to cover all my expenses. I understood their financial limitations and took out student loans to cover what my scholarship didn't. I worked 3 part-time jobs simultaneously throughout college. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, I served coffee at the campus cafe before classes. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I worked as a research assistant for one of my professors. Weekends were spent tutoring high school students in math and English. Between work classes and studying, I barely slept more than 5 hours a night. Meanwhile, Amber started community college but dropped out after just 1 semester, claiming it wasn't the right fit. She moved back home and cycled through a series of retail and food service jobs, never lasting more than a few months at any of them. When she couldn't make rent on her apartment, my parents covered it. When her car broke down, they paid for repairs. When she maxed out her credit cards, they helped her consolidate the debt. After graduating summa cum laude, I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Chicago. My starting salary barely covered my rent in a tiny apartment shared with 2 roommates, student loan payments, and ramen noodle dinners. But I worked tirelessly, volunteering for additional projects, staying late when needed, and continuously learning new skills. Each promotion brought a little more financial stability, though I still lived frugally, mindful of my student debt. I made sure to visit my parents regularly despite the 4-hour drive each way. During those visits, I often found myself listening to their concerns about Amber. She had lost another job. She needed money for car insurance. She was thinking about moving to Colorado with a boyfriend she had known for 3 weeks. I offered advice when asked, but mostly I just listened, knowing they needed someone to share their worries with. When I could, I helped them financially as well. When their refrigerator died, I sent money for a new one. When Dad needed dental work, not covered by insurance, I handled the bills. When their 20th anniversary approached, I arranged for them to spend a weekend at a nice bed and breakfast in Duluth. I never mentioned these contributions to Amber, not wanting to create more tension between us. Last year, after 10 years of dedication and hard work, I was promoted to Executive Marketing Director. The substantial salary increase finally gave me the financial freedom to do something truly special for my parents. They had sacrificed so much for us over the years, putting their own dreams on hold to raise us. I knew they had always wanted to travel to Europe, particularly Spain, but had never had the opportunity. Dad often talked about the architecture of Barcelona and the history of Madrid, teaching his students about places he had only seen in books and documentaries. Mom collected recipes from Spanish cuisine, attempting to recreate them in our Minnesota kitchen. With my new position came new responsibilities, but also the chance to plan something extraordinary. I decided to surprise them with a 2-week trip to Spain for their 35th anniversary with me as their guide and companion. It would be the trip of a lifetime, something they would never forget. Once I decided to plan this trip, I threw myself into the research with the same dedication I apply to my marketing campaigns. I spent countless evenings after work and weekends hunched over my laptop reading travel blogs, studying guidebooks, and watching videos about Spain. I wanted to create the perfect itinerary that would capture everything my parents had dreamed about. I started by mapping out the key cities we would visit. Madrid would be our first stop with its world-class museums and grand plazas. I researched the best times to visit the Prado Museum to avoid crowds and found a highly rated food tour that would introduce my parents to authentic Spanish cuisine. I knew Dad would love the Royal Palace with its historical significance, while Mom would appreciate the beautiful Retiro Park. Next would be Seville with its stunning Moorish architecture and flamenco culture. I found a small family-owned hotel in the historic Santa Cruz neighborhood, where the narrow medieval streets would enchant them. I scheduled an evening flamenco show at a venue known for its authenticity rather than tourist traps. I also arranged a day trip to Córdoba to see the magnificent mezquita, knowing Dad would be fascinated by the unique blend of Islamic and Christian architecture. Barcelona would be our final destination. I booked tickets for Gaudi's masterpieces, ensuring we wouldn't miss La Sagrada Familia or Park Güell. I found a wine tasting experience that would take us to a family vineyard in the nearby Penedès region. For their anniversary dinner, I secured reservations at a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The financial aspect required careful planning. Even with my new salary, this would be a significant expense. I set up a dedicated savings account and automatically transferred a portion of each paycheck. I cut back on my own expenses, bringing lunch to work instead of buying it, canceling streaming services I rarely used, and postponing the purchase of a new couch I had been eyeing. I tracked flights for months, waiting for the perfect time to book when prices dropped briefly during a promotion. For accommodations, I splurged on hotels that offered comfort and character, rather than generic chain experiences. In Madrid, I found a boutique hotel near Gran Via, with a rooftop terrace where they could enjoy evening drinks overlooking the city. In Seville, the small hotel I chose had a courtyard filled with orange trees and traditional Andalusian decor. In Barcelona, I selected a place near the Gothic Quarter, with balconies adorned with flowers and a view of a charming square below. At work, I carefully negotiated the time off planning the trip, during a period when my team would be between major projects. I prepared detailed briefs for my colleagues who would cover my responsibilities and scheduled regular check-ins to ensure everything would run smoothly in my absence. My boss, impressed by my dedication over the years, was supportive of my extended vacation, recognizing that I rarely took time off. As the trip drew closer, my excitement grew. I imagined my dad's face when he stood before the paintings he had taught about for decades. I pictured my mom sampling authentic paella and sangria in a sun-drenched plaza. I envisioned quiet evenings where the three of us would sit on a terrace discussing the day's adventures as the Spanish sunset painted the sky. I wanted to make this trip special in every detail. I purchased new luggage for them as part of the gift, high-quality pieces that would last for future travels. I ordered Spanish language guides and history books about the regions we would visit, knowing Dad would want to prepare. I even found a cookbook featuring Spanish recipes for Mom to try when we returned home. The itinerary I created balanced structured tours with plenty of free time for exploration and relaxation. I knew my parents would appreciate having some activities planned, but would also enjoy the freedom to wander and discover things at their own pace. I made sure to include time for long lunches and afternoon siestas, wanting them to experience the Spanish lifestyle fully, rather than rushing from one attraction to another. Throughout the planning process, I had several phone conversations with my parents, where I subtly inquired about their availability during the dates I had in mind. I mentioned that I might have a surprise for their anniversary, but kept the details vague. Mom tried repeatedly to guess what I was planning, but I managed to keep the secret, wanting the reveal to be truly special. As the weeks passed, I created a digital photo album with images of the places we would visit, interspersed with family photos and congratulatory anniversary messages. I planned to present this to them at a special dinner at my apartment, where I would reveal the surprise. I practiced what I would say, how I would hand them the envelope containing the itinerary and plane tickets, imagining their shocked expressions and joyful tears. Every time I felt tired from the extra hours spent planning or worried about the expense, I reminded myself that my parents deserved this. They had given so much to Amber and me, often at the expense of their own dreams. This was my chance to give something back, to create memories that would last the rest of their lives. I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized what I had done. The day before the big reveal dinner, I called them to confirm they were still coming to Chicago for the weekend. Mom sounded excited, mentioning that they were looking forward to spending time with me. As I hung up the phone, I felt a wave of anticipation and joy. After months of planning, I was finally going to give my parents the gift of a lifetime. I spent the entire day preparing for the special dinner where I would reveal the Spain trip to my parents. I wanted everything to be perfect. My apartment, usually showing signs of my busy work schedule with scattered papers and coffee mugs, was spotless. I had scrubbed and polished every surface, arranged fresh flowers on the dining table, and even hung new curtains to brighten the space. The menu was carefully planned around my parents' favorite dishes. Dad loved my rosemary garlic roast chicken, and Mom always raved about my homemade cheesecake with berry compote. I incorporated subtle Spanish touches as a hint of what was to come, serving a manchego cheese appetizer and a bottle of Rioja wine I had been saving for a special occasion. The table was set with my best dishes and candles, creating an atmosphere that felt both special and intimate. I played their favorite jazz music softly in the background as I heard the buzzer announcing their arrival. Taking a deep breath to calm my excited nerves, I pressed the button to let them into the building. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. Mom hugged me tightly, her familiar perfume bringing back childhood memories. Dad, more reserved as always, gave me a warm smile and a pat on the shoulder. They both looked older than when I had last seen them 3 months ago. Dad's hair was grayer around the temples, and Mom's laugh lines seemed deeper. It struck me how quickly time was passing, making me even more grateful for the opportunity to give them this special experience. "Something smells amazing," Dad said, hanging his jacket on the coat rack by the door. "Is that your famous roast chicken I smell?" Mom asked, following me into the kitchen where I was putting the finishing touches on dinner. "It sure is," I replied, pouring them each a glass of wine. "I wanted to make all your favorites tonight." Dinner conversation flowed easily, as it always did when we were together. Dad talked about his current students and the Civil War unit they were studying. Mom shared stories from the retirement community, where she now volunteered twice a week since leaving her nursing job. I told them about my recent promotion and the new projects I was overseeing. "We're so proud of you, Hope," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've accomplished so much." "Speaking of Amber," Dad interjected, though no one had mentioned my sister. "She's between jobs again. That startup she was working for folded last month." I nodded sympathetically, used to conversations about my sister's employment woes. "That's tough. Is she looking for something new?" Mom sighed. "You know Amber. She's taking some time to figure out her next move. She's thinking about going back to school, maybe for graphic design this time." I refrained from pointing out that this was the third potential career path my sister had considered in the past 2 years. Instead, I stood up to clear the dinner plates, my heart beating faster as the moment for the surprise drew closer. "Don't get up yet," I said as I brought the cheesecake to the table. "I actually have something special to share with you tonight." I went to the bookshelf where I had hidden the wrapped package containing the custom photo album of Spain and the envelope with the itinerary and ticket confirmations. The package was wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon, their favorite colors. "What's this?" Mom asked as I placed it in front of them. "Your father and I should be giving you gifts for your promotion, not the other way around." "This is something I've been planning for a long time," I explained, my voice trembling slightly with excitement. "Go ahead, open it." They exchanged curious glances before Dad carefully untied the ribbon and Mom tore the paper with childlike enthusiasm. The leather-bound photo album had their names and 35 years of love embossed on the cover in elegant script. As they opened the album and began flipping through the pages, their expressions changed from curiosity to confusion to dawning realization. The first few pages showed family photos from their wedding and throughout their marriage. Then came the pictures of Spain, the Prado Museum Gaudi's architecture, flamenco dancers, and Spanish landscapes, interspersed with notes about what we would see and do together. Hope, Mom gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Is this what I think it is? I pulled out the envelope and handed it to them. Happy 35th anniversary. I'm taking you both to Spain for 2 weeks. All expenses paid, all arrangements made. It's been your dream forever, and now we're going to make it come true. Together. Dad opened the envelope with shaking hands, pulling out the detailed itinerary and flight confirmations. For a moment, both my parents were speechless, looking at the documents, and then at me with wide eyes. This is incredible. Dad finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Mom had tears streaming down her face. Oh, Hope, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given us. I can't believe you did this. Their initial reaction was everything I had hoped for. They hugged me, thanked me profusely, and began eagerly examining the itinerary, exclaiming over each planned activity. Dad was particularly excited about the Prado Museum and the historical sites in Toledo. Mom couldn't wait for the cooking class I had scheduled in Barcelona. But as they continued to look through the materials, I noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor. They exchanged a look I had seen many times before, a silent communication developed over 35 years of marriage. My stomach tightened instinctively. This is truly amazing, sweetheart, Mom said, her tone changing slightly. But, I was just thinking about Amber. What about her? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Another glance between my parents. Dad cleared his throat. Well, with her losing her job and everything, she's been having a really tough time lately. I waited, sensing what was coming, but hoping desperately I was wrong. Mom reached over and patted my hand. We were just thinking, and please don't take this the wrong way, but maybe Amber could use this trip more than us right now. A change of scenery might help her figure things out. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implication of her words sank in. You want Amber to go to Spain instead of you. Or maybe instead of you, Dad suggested gently. We could still go, but take Amber with us. Or she could go with you. We're just thinking she really needs something positive in her life right now. I sat frozen, trying to process what was happening. The trip I had spent months planning, the special experience I wanted to share with my parents, was being casually redistributed to include or favor my chronically unemployed sister. I planned this for us, I said slowly, struggling to keep my voice steady. This was meant to be our trip together. I wanted to give you both this experience, to share it with you. We know, and it's incredibly generous, Dad assured me. We're just concerned about Amber. She's in a fragile state right now. She's always in a fragile state, I replied, immediately regretting the bitterness that crept into my voice. Mom frowned slightly. That's not fair, Hope. Your sister struggles in ways you don't. You've always had such an easy time with everything. An easy time. The words stung like a physical slap. The countless hours working multiple jobs through college, the years of 60-hour work weeks to advance my career, the careful financial planning and sacrifices to afford this very trip, none of that had been easy. I think what your mother means, Dad interjected, noticing my expression, is that you've always been so capable and independent. Amber needs more support. I took a deep breath, trying to salvage the evening and my carefully laid plans. What if we look at planning a separate trip for Amber another time? This one is already booked for the 3 of us. My parents exchanged another look. We could help cover the cost of changing the reservations, Mom suggested. It would mean so much to have Amber included. I felt a wall building between us, brick by invisible brick. The cheesecake sat uneaten on the table, the candles burning lower, casting long shadows. The thoughtfulness of my gift was being overwritten by concern for my sister, as had happened countless times before. "I'll think about it," I said finally, knowing I needed time to process my feelings before saying something I might regret. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of stilted conversation and forced smiles. When my parents left, the hugs at the door felt awkward and tense. I promised to call them the next day to discuss the trip further. After they drove away, I stood in my pristine apartment surrounded by the remains of the perfect evening I had planned. The half-eaten food, the open photo album showing images of a trip that was already transforming into something entirely different than what I had intended. Alone in the silence, the tears finally came. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that left me curled on my couch, clutching a pillow to muffle the sound. Years of being the responsible one, the one who didn't need help, the one whose achievements were expected rather than celebrated, all crashed down on me at once. In trying to give my parents a perfect gift, I had only managed to highlight the painful dynamic that had defined our family for as long as I could remember. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the evening's events in my mind, imagining all the things I should have said. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and reached for my phone, texting my best friend Taylor. "You awake?" I knew it was a long shot at this hour. To my surprise, 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Insomnia again. What's up?" In a series of rapid texts, I poured out the whole story, from the months of planning to my parents' shocking suggestion that Amber go instead. Taylor's responses were appropriately outraged on my behalf. "That is seriously messed up. After all the work you put into planning it." "I don't know what to do," I typed back. "Part of me wants to cancel the whole thing." "Don't make any decisions tonight," Taylor advised. "Sleep on it if you can. We'll get coffee tomorrow and figure this out." I put down my phone and stared at the ceiling, my mind wandering back through years of similar incidents. The time my high school graduation party was cut short because Amber was having a crisis about her college applications. The Christmas when my parents gave me a sweater while Amber received a laptop because she needed it for school, despite having dropped out the previous semester. The countless family gatherings interrupted by calls about Amber's latest emergency. It wasn't that I wanted my sister to struggle or that I resented my parents for supporting her. I understood that Amber faced challenges I didn't. What hurt was the persistent implication that my stability and success somehow made me less deserving of attention and consideration. That because I had worked hard and built a secure life, my feelings and needs were secondary. Around dawn, I finally drifted into a restless sleep, only to be awakened by my phone ringing 3 hours later. It was my mother, her voice cheerful as if the previous evening's tension had never occurred. "Good morning, sweetheart. Dad and I were thinking of going to that brunch place you like before we drive back to Minnesota. Are you free?" I made an excuse about work deadlines, not ready to face them again so soon. The hurt was still too raw, and I feared saying something in anger that I couldn't take back. "Oh, that's too bad," Mom said, sounding disappointed. "Well, we'll talk about the Spain plans later then. Love you." The casual reference to Spain plans, as if they were still undecided, made my stomach clench. In my mother's mind, the trip I had meticulously planned was now a flexible arrangement open to revision. I mumbled a goodbye and hung up, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. Later that day, I sat across from my therapist, Dr. Patterson, in her softly lit office. I'd been seeing her monthly for about a year, working through various aspects of my perfectionism and people-pleasing tendencies. Today's session had taken on new urgency. "It sounds like this situation has triggered some long-standing patterns in your family dynamic," she observed after I recounted the dinner disaster. I nodded, twisting a tissue in my hands. "It's always been this way. Amber needs, so Amber gets. I'm fine, so I can wait or go without." "And how does that make you feel?" Dr. Patterson asked. "Invisible," I said after a moment's reflection. Like my feelings don't matter as much as hers. Like no matter what I achieve or how hard I work, it's never enough to earn the same consideration Amber gets automatically. We discussed the concept of family roles, how I had adopted the capable one persona while Amber had become the fragile one, and how these roles had calcified over time, trapping us all in patterns that no longer served us. "What do you want to do about the trip?" Dr. Patterson asked as our session neared its end. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to stand firm, this is my gift, my plan, my money. But another part wonders if I'm being selfish. Maybe Amber really does need this more than I do." "Consider this," Dr. Patterson said gently. "Is it truly selfish to want recognition and appreciation for a thoughtful gift? Is it selfish to want to share a special experience with your parents as you planned it? Or have you been conditioned to see any prioritization of your own wants and needs as selfishness?" Her question stayed with me as I left the session and returned to my apartment. Opening my laptop, I was confronted with the email confirmations for our Spain reservations. Non-refundable deposits had been paid for most activities. Changing the bookings to include or substitute Amber would incur significant fees, not to mention the logistical complications of rearranging an itinerary planned for 3 people. As I scrolled through my email, a notification popped up on my phone. It was from Instagram. Amber had posted a story. Curious, I tapped on it and felt my blood run cold. There on the screen was a selfie of my sister overlaid with the text, "Guess who's going to Spain? So excited I could die." My parents had clearly called her immediately after leaving my apartment. And rather than waiting for any further discussion with me, Amber had already claimed the trip as her own. The comments under the post were filled with congratulations and friends asking for details. Amber was responding to them as if the trip was already settled, even mentioning specific locations I had included in the itinerary. My phone rang, displaying Amber's name. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Hey, sis." Her voice was bubbling with excitement. "Mom and Dad just told me about Spain. I can't believe it. This is exactly what I need right now." "Amber," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "nothing has been decided yet. I planned this trip as an anniversary gift for Mom and Dad. We were going to go together, the 3 of us." There was a pause. "Oh, well, they said you were thinking about letting me go instead, since you can travel whenever you want with your fancy job and I'm, you know, unemployed." I supplied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Going through a transition," she corrected defensively. "Anyway, I already told everyone I'm going. Jenny and Marcos are so jealous. Marcos went to Barcelona last year and said it was life-changing." The conversation continued in this vein, with Amber talking about the trip as if it were already hers, while I grew increasingly frustrated. Any attempt to explain my perspective was met with subtle guilt trips about how much she needed this after her job loss and recent breakup with her boyfriend. "Look," I finally interrupted, "I need some time to think about this. Nothing is decided yet, so maybe hold off on telling more people until we figure things out." Amber's tone immediately cooled. "Wow, selfish much. I thought you'd be happy for me. It's not like you can't afford another trip." After ending the call, I turned off my phone, entirely needing a break from the family drama. The next few days passed in a blur of work demands and avoided calls from my parents. I threw myself into projects at the office, staying late and volunteering for additional responsibilities. My colleagues noticed the change in my typically balanced approach. "Everything okay?" my coworker Amanda asked one evening when she found me still at my desk at 8 p.m. "You've been here late every night this week." I gave a non-committal response about deadlines, but Amanda wasn't easily deterred. As we waited for the elevator together, she shared her own experience with family expectations and the challenges of being the responsible sibling. Her understanding helped me feel less alone in my struggle. Meanwhile, the physical toll of my stress became increasingly apparent. I developed tension headaches that no amount of ibuprofen could touch. My sleep remained disturbed, leaving dark circles under my eyes that concealer couldn't hide. Even my digestion rebelled, with every meal sitting uncomfortably in my stomach. The initial hurt was evolving into something harder and more resolute. Years of swallowing my feelings of putting others' needs before my own had created a pressure that could no longer be contained. It was time to speak up, or risk being permanently cast in the role of the accommodating daughter who always understood, always gave in, and never needed anything for herself. I realized I was at a decision point: continue the pattern of prioritizing everyone else's feelings over my own, or finally stand up for myself and risk the family discord that would inevitably follow. The old Hope would have found a compromise, would have figured out a way to include Amber while silently nursing her resentment. But I wasn't sure I could be that person anymore, not without losing something essential within myself. As I stared at the Spain itinerary on my laptop screen, I made a decision. It was time for a conversation that was long overdue, not just about this trip, but about the family dynamics that had shaped our relationships for decades. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary both for me and ultimately for all of us. I picked up my phone and turned it back on, watching as missed call notifications from my parents and sister flooded the screen. Taking a deep breath, I texted my parents, "We need to talk. I'm coming to Minnesota this weekend." The 4-hour drive from Chicago to my parents' home in Minnesota gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I wanted to say. I practiced setting boundaries without accusation, expressing hurt without attacking, being firm without being harsh. By the time I pulled into their familiar driveway, I felt as prepared as I could be for the difficult conversation ahead. Their house looked the same as always: the blue shutters, recently repainted mom's flower beds, meticulously maintained despite the approach of fall. The normalcy of the scene contrasted sharply with the emotional turmoil I felt inside. For a moment I sat in my car gathering courage before grabbing my overnight bag and walking to the front door. Mom answered before I could knock, clearly having watched for my arrival through the living room window. "Hope, we're so glad you came," she said, pulling me into a hug that I returned stiffly. "Dad's in the kitchen making coffee." The house smelled of cinnamon and apples, Mom's signature fall candles burning on the mantel. Family photos lined the walls, documenting our growth from gap-toothed children to adults. I noticed that the most prominently displayed recent photo was of Amber at her community college graduation, though she had only completed a certification program, not a degree. My own master's degree graduation photo was tucked on a side table, partially obscured by a decorative vase. Dad emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "There's my girl," he said with a warm smile. "Coffee's almost ready, unless you'd rather have tea." The familiar routine of homecoming threatened to lull me into my usual accommodating self, the daughter who smiled and nodded and kept the peace. I reminded myself why I had come. "Coffee is fine," I said, setting my bag down. "But before we settle in, I think we need to talk about the Spain trip." A look passed between my parents, that silent communication that excluded everyone else. My mother's smile tightened slightly. "Of course, dear. But wouldn't you like to relax a bit first? It was a long drive." "I'd rather discuss it now," I insisted, moving toward the living room. "This is important to me." We sat awkwardly, my parents on the sofa and me in the armchair across from them, an arrangement that somehow felt appropriate for the conversation to come. I had prepared note cards with talking points, but left them in my bag, wanting this to be genuine rather than rehearsed. "I spent months planning the Spain trip." I began, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I researched destinations that you both would love, saved for it, made personal sacrifices to afford it, and arranged time off work. I did this because I love you and wanted to give you something special for your anniversary, something we could experience together." My parents nodded, their expressions a mixture of appreciation and wariness. "When I presented this gift to you and you immediately suggested changing the plans to include or substitute Amber, it hurt me deeply," I continued. "It made me feel like my effort and thoughtfulness weren't valued, and that once again Amber's needs were being prioritized over mine." "That's not fair," Mom interjected. "We appreciate everything you do, Hope. We were just concerned about your sister." "I understand that you worry about Amber," I acknowledged. "But I need you to understand that this pattern has been happening our entire lives. When something is important to me, it often gets overshadowed by whatever is happening with Amber." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We've always been proud of you, Hope. You've just never seemed to need as much from us as your sister does." "Everyone needs support and recognition, Dad," I said quietly. "Even people who seem self-sufficient. The fact that I don't create crises doesn't mean I don't have needs and feelings that deserve consideration." I could see my words landing perhaps for the first time. My mother's defensive posture softened slightly. "We never meant to make you feel less important," she said. "I know you didn't. But intention and impact are different things." I took a deep breath before continuing. "I've decided that the Spain trip will proceed as I originally planned it. You and Dad and me for 2 weeks in October. If you choose not to go, I'll understand, but I won't be changing the arrangements to include Amber." The firmness in my voice surprised even me. My parents exchanged another glance, this one tinged with something like respect. "Amber will be very disappointed," Mom said, though with less conviction than I had expected. "She's already told all her friends." "That was Amber's choice made before anything was decided," I pointed out. "And while I empathize with her disappointment, it doesn't change my decision." The conversation might have continued productively from there had the front door not swung open at that moment. Amber burst in without knocking, something she had always done despite repeated requests for privacy from our parents. "I thought I saw your car," she exclaimed, dropping her purse on the hall table and striding into the living room. "Were you going to visit without telling me? Oh wait, are you guys talking about the Spain trip? Because I had some ideas about the itinerary." The tension in the room was palpable as Amber flopped onto the couch beside our mother, seemingly oblivious to the serious discussion she had interrupted. She was wearing new clothes, I noticed, despite supposedly being in financial distress due to her job loss. "Actually, Amber," I said, maintaining my composure, "I was just explaining to Mom and Dad that the trip will be proceeding as originally planned with the three of us." Amber's expression froze, then crumpled into a familiar look of injured disbelief. "But they said I could go instead of you. I already told everyone." "No, we discussed the possibility," Dad corrected gently. "Nothing was decided." "This isn't fair." Amber's voice rose dramatically. "Hope can go to Europe whenever she wants with her big fancy job. I never get to do anything nice." The familiar script was playing out exactly as it had countless times before. Amber's distress escalating, my parents looking torn and uncomfortable, me expected to be the reasonable one who gave in for the sake of family harmony. Not this time. "This isn't about fairness," I said calmly. "This is about a specific gift I planned for Mom and Dad's anniversary. A gift that involved not just money, but time and thought and personal involvement." "So you're saying I don't deserve nice things?" Amber demanded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm saying that this particular trip isn't about you," I replied, refusing to be baited into the role of villain. "And I'm saying that it's time for all of us to recognize some unhealthy patterns in how we function as a family." What followed was one of the most honest and at times painful conversations our family had ever had. Years of unspoken resentments and expectations bubbled to the surface. I spoke about feeling overlooked despite my achievements. Amber admitted to feeling perpetually in my shadow, taking advantage of our parents' concern as a way to receive the attention she craved. Mom and Dad acknowledged their role in enabling Amber's dependency and taking my self-sufficiency for granted. There were tears and raised voices, moments of defensive anger and uncomfortable silence. But beneath it all was something new, a genuine attempt to hear each other, to understand perspectives long ignored or dismissed. As the intensity of the conversation finally began to ebb, I felt both exhausted and somehow lighter. Nothing had been fully resolved, and years of entrenched patterns wouldn't change overnight. But something had shifted. I had advocated for myself without apology, and for once I had been truly heard. "The Spain trip is happening as planned," I reiterated as the conversation wound down. "But maybe this is the beginning of some healthier interactions for all of us." To my surprise, it was Amber who spoke up. "I still think it sucks that I don't get to go," she said with characteristic bluntness. "But I get why you're mad. If I'd spent months planning something and then had it taken away, I'd be pissed too." It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from my sister, it was significant progress. As I looked at my family gathered in the living room, tension gradually giving way to tentative understanding, I felt a cautious optimism. This conversation had been long overdue, and while painful, it felt like a necessary first step toward something better. The aftermath of our family confrontation was both challenging and surprisingly positive. When I returned to Chicago the following day, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely invigorated. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had clearly articulated my needs and stood firm in my boundaries regardless of the discomfort it caused. My colleagues noticed the change in me. "You seem different," Amanda commented during our morning coffee run. "More, I don't know, present somehow." When I briefly explained what had happened with my family, she nodded in recognition. "I went through something similar with my parents last year. It's hard but necessary. Good for you for speaking up." Amanda's support was just the beginning. As word of my situation spread among my close coworkers, I was surprised by how many shared similar experiences with family dynamics. What I had thought was my unique burden turned out to be a common struggle, and the solidarity I felt was deeply comforting. Meanwhile, the Spain trip required some recalibration. My parents had ultimately agreed to go as originally planned, though there was still an undercurrent of concern about leaving Amber behind. I remained firm in my decision while being compassionate about their worries. However, a new complication arose when Taylor called one evening with unexpected news. "Remember that project I mentioned that might send me to Europe?" she said without preamble when I answered the phone. "The consulting gig in Frankfurt." I recalled her mentioning it months ago but hadn't heard updates since. "Yes, it just got approved, and guess when they want me there? The exact same time as your Spain trip, we'd only be a 2-hour flight apart." An idea began to form, one that felt both scary and exhilarating. "What if," I said slowly, "I still took the trip but with you instead of my parents?" There was a pause on the line. "Are you serious? What about your parents' anniversary gift?" The gift was the trip itself, which they're now uncomfortable taking because of Amber. But maybe I don't have to cancel entirely. Maybe I can still go and have an amazing experience just with a different travel companion. The more we discussed it, the more right it felt. I had already paid for the trip, and most of the bookings could be adjusted for 2 people instead of 3. It would mean letting go of the original vision I had for the trip, but perhaps this was part of my growth, learning to adapt my expectations when circumstances changed rather than abandoning my own joy entirely. That night, I called my parents to propose the new plan. "I've been thinking about the Spain trip," I began carefully. "I know you're both torn about going without Amber, and I understand that. What would you think if I still took the trip but went with Taylor instead? She'll be in Europe for work at the same time." The relief in my mother's voice was palpable. "Oh, hope that sounds like a wonderful solution. You and Taylor will have such a good time together." "We'd still need to celebrate your anniversary," I insisted. "Maybe with a nice dinner here in the States, something all 4 of us could do together." After hanging up, I felt a mixture of emotions. There was still a twinge of sadness that my original vision wouldn't come to fruition, but there was also excitement about the new plan and pride in finding a solution that honored both my investment in the trip and my parents' concerns. The next few weeks were filled with preparations for the revised journey. Taylor and I met for dinner to discuss the itinerary, adjusting it to better suit our interests. We kept many of the highlights I had originally planned, but added some new elements: a day trip to a yoga retreat outside Barcelona that Taylor had read about, an evening food tour in Madrid that focused on innovative tapas restaurants. "I need to buy some new clothes," Taylor announced after we finalized the itinerary. "Everything I own screams corporate America rather than European adventure." Shopping with Taylor proved to be unexpectedly therapeutic. As we browsed through summer dresses and comfortable walking shoes, I found myself genuinely excited about the trip again. The focus had shifted from creating a perfect experience for my parents to embracing an adventure for myself, something I rarely prioritized. "You should get this," Taylor insisted, holding up a bold red dress that was unlike anything in my typically conservative wardrobe. "It's perfect for that flamenco show in Seville." "It's not really my style." I hesitated, though I admired the vibrant color. "Exactly." Taylor pushed the dress into my hands. "This trip is about trying new things, isn't it? About stepping out of old patterns." She was right, of course. The entire situation with my family had been about breaking free from established roles and expectations. Why not extend that liberation to other aspects of my life? I bought the dress along with several other items that represented a departure from my usual safe choices. The night before our departure, Taylor came over for a final planning session and an impromptu packing party. As we checked our lists and organized our suitcases, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Just wanted to wish you a wonderful trip. Mom and I are so proud of you. Bring back lots of pictures. The simple message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Despite everything, there was love there, and perhaps a new appreciation for me as an individual with needs and desires of my own. Everything okay? Taylor asked, noticing my emotional reaction. Yes, I said, showing her the text. I think it really is. As we finished packing, surrounded by travel guides and Spanish phrasebooks, I felt a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. This trip had transformed from a gift for others into something else entirely, a gift to myself, a declaration of my own worth and my right to pursue joy on my own terms. The journey ahead would be different than I had originally planned, but perhaps even more meaningful for that difference. It represented not just a vacation, but a milestone in my personal growth, a tangible symbol of my commitment to honoring my own needs alongside those of the people I loved. As Taylor left for the night with plans to meet at the airport the following morning, she hugged me tightly. "This is going to be amazing," she said with conviction. "You deserve this hope. You really do." For once, I believed it without reservation. I deserved this trip, this adventure, this celebration of life. Not because I had earned it through achievement or sacrifice, but simply because I was worthy of joy and experience just as I was. Our 2 weeks in Spain unfolded like a dream each day, bringing new discoveries and delights that far exceeded my careful planning. Taylor proved to be the perfect travel companion, her spontaneous nature balancing my tendency to overplan her humor, lightening moments of travel stress, her perspective helping me see things I might have missed on my own. Madrid welcomed us with warm sunshine and the vibrant energy of a city fully alive. We spent our first day wandering through the elegant Plaza Mayor and the bustling Mercado de San Miguel, sampling olives, cheeses, and thin slices of jamón ibérico that melted on our tongues. In the Prado Museum, we stood mesmerized before Goya's dark paintings and Velázquez's masterful royal portraits, sharing whispered observations, and sometimes simply standing in appreciative silence. "I never would have come here on my own," Taylor admitted as we sipped sangria at a sidewalk cafe, watching the parade of locals and tourists against the backdrop of Madrid's grand architecture. "I'm usually all about beaches and nightlife when I travel. And I probably would have stuck too rigidly to my itinerary without you." I acknowledged, thinking of the spontaneous detour we had taken that morning, when Taylor spotted a tiny bookshop tucked into a narrow side street. The extra hour we spent browsing had meant rearranging our museum schedule, something that would have stressed me greatly in the past, but now seemed a small adjustment in service of a richer experience. In Seville, I wore the red dress to the flamenco show, feeling bold and vibrant in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. The performance itself was mesmerizing, the dancers' passion and precision, creating an emotional connection that transcended language barriers. I found myself moved to tears by a particularly intense solo, the female dancer's expressions conveying a story of love loss and resilience that resonated deeply with my own recent experiences. "That was incredible," I whispered to Taylor as the audience erupted in applause. "I've never seen anything so powerful." "You know what's also incredible?" Taylor replied, nudging my shoulder. "The guy at the next table hasn't stopped looking at you all night." I blushed, suddenly self-conscious in my uncharacteristic outfit. "It's probably just the dress." "It's definitely not just the dress," Taylor insisted. "It's you, Hope. You're different on this trip. More open, more present. It's attractive." Her observation gave me pause. I did feel different, lighter somehow, as if I had set down a heavy burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The weight of always being the responsible one, the perfect daughter, the achiever had been temporarily suspended, allowing space for a more authentic version of myself to emerge. Barcelona brought its own magic, from the whimsical architecture of Gaudí to the Mediterranean breeze along the beachfront. We took a day trip to a family-owned vineyard in Penedès, learning about the winemaking process and enjoying a leisurely lunch in a sun-dappled courtyard. The elderly owner, upon learning it was my first visit to Spain, insisted on giving us a special tour of the cellars, sharing stories of his family's 5 generations of wine production. "This was supposed to be your parents' anniversary trip," Taylor mused one evening as we watched the sunset from Park Güell, the city spread out below us in a tapestry of lights and shadows. "Do you regret that they didn't come?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm sad they missed this experience," I said finally, "but I don't regret coming with you instead. This trip has become something else entirely, something I needed in ways I didn't fully understand when I was planning it." Throughout our journey, I maintained minimal contact with my family, sending occasional photos and brief updates, but otherwise remaining present in my European adventure. It was the longest I had gone without detailed communication with my parents since moving to Chicago, a small but significant act of independence. On our last night in Barcelona, I received a surprising text from Amber. "Hope you look really happy in your pictures. I'm glad you're having a good time. Maybe you could tell me about your favorite places when you get back. I'm thinking about saving for a trip next year." The message represented a subtle but meaningful shift. There was no hint of resentment or entitlement, just a simple acknowledgement of my experience and a tentative reach toward more adult interaction. I replied with genuine warmth, promising to share recommendations when I returned. As Taylor and I boarded our return flight to the United States, I felt transformed in ways both profound and subtle. The woman who had meticulously planned an anniversary gift for her parents had evolved into someone with a stronger sense of self-worth and clearer boundaries. The Spain that had existed in my imagination, carefully researched and scheduled, had been replaced by the real Spain of unexpected discoveries, spontaneous detours, and moments of beauty that could never have been planned. "Ready to go home?" Taylor asked as we fastened our seatbelts for takeoff. "Yes," I replied with certainty. "But not the same home, not exactly. I'm coming back different." Taylor squeezed my hand in understanding as the plane lifted into the clouds, carrying us back to a life that awaited my return, with all its complexities and challenges, but now faced by a stronger, more authentic version of myself. 6 months after our return from Spain, my parents Amber and I gathered around the dining table at my apartment in Chicago. The occasion was ostensibly to celebrate my 33rd birthday, but it felt more significant than that, a marker of how far we had come as a family since the confrontation that had changed our dynamics. The apartment looked different from when I had last hosted my parents for the ill-fated Spain reveal dinner. I had redecorated with inspiration from our travels, a framed print of a flamenco dancer in mid-motion, a hand-painted tile from a shop in Seville, photographs Taylor had taken of me standing before Gaudí's, masterpieces, laughing and more relaxed than I had been in years. "These patatas bravas are delicious," Dad commented, helping himself to seconds. "Just like the ones we had at that restaurant in Madrid you recommended." My parents had eventually made their own trip to Spain, a more modest version than what I had planned, but meaningful nonetheless. They had followed many of my suggestions, staying at some of the same hotels and visiting key sites I had highlighted from my experience. The cooking class was their favorite part, Amber chimed in. She had remained at home during their trip, but had apparently heard all about their adventures in detail. The most striking change was in Amber herself. After my parents returned from Europe, they had finally taken steps to establish healthier boundaries with her. The constant financial support had ceased, replaced with encouragement to find sustainable employment and develop independence. To everyone's surprise, especially, her own Amber had risen to the challenge. "How's the new job going?" I asked her, genuinely interested. She had recently started as an administrative assistant at a local community college, her longest stretch of stable employment in years. "It's actually great," she replied with unexpected enthusiasm. "My boss is talking about having me coordinate student activities next semester. And," she added with a proud smile, "I haven't had to ask Mom and Dad for money in 3 months. "We're proud of you both," Mom said, looking between Amber and me. "You've both grown so much this year." The comment might have seemed like typical parent platitudes in the past, but now it carried weight, because it acknowledged both of us equally. No longer was Amber the perpetual focus of concern and attention, nor was I the overlooked achiever whose accomplishments were taken for granted. Our family healing had not been immediate or simple. There had been setbacks and difficult conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But the foundation had shifted, creating space for more authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than entrenched roles. "I've been saving, Amber mentioned as we moved from dinner to dessert, a Spanish-inspired crema catalana I had perfected after several attempts. "For my own trip. Maybe not Spain right away, but somewhere. Maybe Montreal or Mexico City to start." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "When you're ready to plan, I'd be happy to help with research." "Actually," Amber replied, "I was thinking I might try figuring it out myself, but maybe we could get coffee sometimes and you could share some general travel tips if you're not too busy." The request represented a new dynamic between us, one where she wasn't automatically expecting me to do the work or provide the solution, but rather seeking advice within appropriate boundaries. It was a small thing perhaps, but significant in the context of our history. After dessert, we moved to the living room where I had prepared coffee and small glasses of the Spanish liqueur we had discovered in Barcelona. As we sipped and chatted, I reflected on the journey we had all taken, not just geographical, but emotional. The Spain trip that had triggered our family reckoning had ultimately become a catalyst for necessary change. What had begun as a gift for my parents had transformed into a gift for all of us, though not in the way I had originally intended. Sometimes the most valuable presents weren't wrapped in pretty paper or presented at special dinners, but emerged from difficult truths finally spoken aloud. "Hope," Dad said, interrupting my thoughts. "We never properly thanked you for what you did for us. Not just planning the trip, but for being honest about how you felt. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted. "But it was necessary. For all of us, I think." Mom reached over to squeeze my hand. "We took you for granted for too long. Assumed you were fine because you seemed so capable. I'm sorry for that." The acknowledgement, simple but sincere, meant more than any extravagant gift could have. It represented a recognition of my full humanity, my right to have needs and feelings to occasionally falter or require support. "I've learned a lot too," I said. "About speaking up for myself, about setting boundaries without guilt. About finding joy in my own life, not just in what I can do for others." As the evening wound down and my family prepared to leave, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The relationships we were building now might be more complex and require more conscious effort than the roles we had inhabited before, but they were infinitely more rewarding in their authenticity. Standing at my door, watching them walk to their car, I thought about the long journey we had taken together, not just over the past 6 months, but throughout our lives. Families were complicated, messy, and sometimes painful, but they were also capable of growth and change when all members were willing to do the difficult work of honest communication. The Spain trip had not turned out as I had meticulously planned. Instead, it had evolved into something more valuable, a turning point, a line in the sand, a declaration of my own worth. In standing up for myself, I had ultimately helped our entire family find a healthier way to connect. As I closed my door and returned to my apartment, now quiet but filled with memories of laughter and honest conversation, I felt grateful for the unexpected journey we had all taken. Sometimes the best adventures weren't found in exotic destinations or carefully planned itineraries, but in the courage to speak our truth and the willingness to listen when others spoke theirs. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who took you for granted? How did you handle that difficult conversation? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of family dynamics and personal growth, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with loved ones. Thank you for being here with me today, and remember that your feelings and needs are valid no matter how together your life might seem to others.